Hi guys, here's a quick introduction how you can use the add-on and for what you have to pay attention for. So first of all, we install it under the preferences and here we click on install from disk and then we choose this file because we use Blender 4.3 and after that you have to go to the add-ons tab and here you have to set the path to the additional blend file the add-on needs to work correctly. So in my case it's this path here. After that, you will find the HairFlow tab in the end panel. And first of all, we have this help button. And with that, you get to all tutorials related to HairFlow. And these things here we will discuss a bit later, because first of all, we will add a simulation. The most important thing for you to know is that the hair has to be a curves object. If you create hair entirely with geometry nodes, then it's always a curves object, but you can even convert normal curves like this one, or sometimes even meshes to curves objects. Very easy with this button. But before you convert it, make sure that you go to the object data properties and then to the geometry. And then make sure that the offset and extrude is set to 0 and also the bevel depth has to be set to 0. And then you can just click on this button. And before I click on it, here, as you can see, we also have our material applied to the hair. And if I now click on this button, then yeah, it's converted to a curves object. And we also have a backup of the old one. And it also appended the right material and added a modifier to control the hair radius. But sometimes you try to change it and nothing happens. And because of that, I added the shape section. And basically, these are the settings you can also change here under curves. But here it's a bit more accessible. And I made it because many people don't know that they have to set the curve shape type to strip to see it also in solid mode with the right radius. So like here, if I change it, then it now works. And I can also change the additional subdivisions here. And also for the render, if I want to use rounded ribbons or 3D curves. Yeah, and also the curve subdivisions. To add a simulation, we first select a target to which the hair will be binded to. This can be either an object or also a specific bone of an armature. So in our case, we choose the head and then we just click on add. And then the simulation is added and here you can also see the modifier and it's also shown here. And it also applies the scaling and rotation of the hair and the parent object so that it can synchronize correctly. If you shouldn't see the hair after adding the simulation, then it's probably because there's no target object selected here. In this case, you would have to set it manually and then also make sure that you have applied the scaling and rotation of this object. If you select the rig as the target, then you will get this additional bone field here. And then you can type in the bone you want, select the hair again, and click on add. And here we go. The only difference is if you select an armature as the target, then it will create a proxy object for the bone. Because in geometry nodes, you can select specific bones. That's why it creates a proxy object and binds it to the specific bone and then selects the proxy object as the parent object. Because of that, if you want to delete a simulation again, then always delete it here and not just the modifier, because then it also deletes the proxy object. Now let's test it a bit. So we just select the head, press play, and then we can move it. And as you can see, it works in real time, like this. Before we go to the settings, what is the start position or automatic start position? Basically, it's the rest position of the hair. So for example, if I deactivate it and move the head a bit, then as you can see, the rest position of the hair is still here. And if I press on play, it first has to go to its new position. And to avoid this, you can just leave this checkbox activated. And then every time you go to the start frame, it updates the rest position like this. In the modifiers panel, we first have this off on toggle. And with that, you can deactivate or activate the simulation. It's important that you never deactivate the complete modifier here, because it also binds the hairs to the parent object, then it wouldn't work anymore. So if you want to deactivate the simulation, then just do it here, and it's still binded. Then we come to the hair resolution because the modifier resamples every curve first, so that we don't have too many points like here for example, and also that the distance between the points is equal. So if I set it to 2, then we only have 2 control points, and if I crank this up, then the hairs are getting more detailed. And 20 is quite a good setting for most cases. So if I play the animation now, as you can see, yeah, we have quite a good performance. But if you want, you can deactivate the resampling here. And then, yeah, as you can see, we only have a very low performance. And it's also a bit buggy because the distance between the points isn't equal here on the top. And yeah, so be careful with the setting. And then we can also select a collision object here. In my case, I choose the head. But keep in mind, this is only for smaller corrections, and it will also result in quite a performance loss. So like here, for example, if I press on play, I only have 6 to 7 FPS now. And if I move the head, then as you can see, we have some collision now, like this. And you can also play a bit with the collision reactivity, but you have to be careful. If you make it too high, then it can result in jittering hair very fast. So yeah, you have to play a bit with it. And also make sure that the collision object has enough faces so that it works correctly. With the affected length, you can control how much of the hair is affected in a strong way. So for example, if I set it to 0.1, and move the head, then as you can see, the upper hair isn't affected very much. But if I set it to 0.9, then most of the hair is affected, like this. Then we can also play a bit with the stiffness. With that, you can control how much the hair wants to keep its original form. So if I set it to 0.1 and move the head, as you can see, it's very flexible now. And if I set it to something like 0.9, then it really wants to keep its original form. And with the reactivity, you can control how much the hair reacts to movement. So if I set it to 0.1 and also set the stiffness back to 0.4, then as you can see, yeah, it reacts very slow. So you can basically also influence the simulation speed with it for something like underwater shots. And if I set it very high, then it will, yeah, react very fast. In this case, it reacts, yeah, already too fast. So I set it to 0.6 or 0.7. And then, yeah, it's quite good, I think. And then we also have the gravity here. So if I take it out, then the hairs will go up and I can also increase it. But if I make it very strong, then I would also go down with the affected length. So yeah, you can play with it and also make something like cool space shots. And then we can also simulate wind. It will also take some performance. So now we have 15 to 16 FPS, but yeah. So we can now change the direction like this. And we can also change the turbulence amount or the turbulence scale to make it faster, and also the turbulence offset if you want. But now let's come to the Proxy Hair function, because this can be super useful if the simulation gets too slow. So like here we have about 13 FPS, and if I activate it and go back to the first frame, then we have our full 24 FPS. And basically what it does, it outputs a lower number of hair strands, but keeps the original shape of the hair. And you can put this even more down to something like 0.5, and it still works perfectly. And you can also set a different radius for the proxy hair. Now let's test it on hair, which is entirely created with geometry nodes. So like here, as you can see, it's only made with modifiers. And if the hair has an emitter object, like here, then you have to choose this emitter object as the target. And then click on the hair and add. Then we have added the simulation. And for the emitter object, you can use something like a child of constraint to parent it to the head. And then we can play the animation and test it. As you can see, we don't have so much FPS here because we have so many modifiers and they have to be calculated before the simulation. But we can counteract a bit with the Proxy Hair function because this also works for hair which is entirely created with geometry nodes. And then if I test it again, as you can see, now we have double as much FPS as before. And then we can crank up the stiffness a bit for this hair to 0.8 maybe. And here we go. The main problem here is that we have very short hair on the side and quite long hair on the top. And if I move the head now, then as you can see, the hair moves partly into the head. And this is because the hair on the side is just too flexible for the short length. And that's why I implemented the partial selection. And with that, you can use different physics settings for longer and shorter hair parts. Before we activate it, we first deactivate the Proxy Hair function for now. And then we add a color attribute. You can name it whatever you want. And then we go into edit mode. And first we select all the short hair parts. So I press C and select everything. Like this. All right. And then I go to curves, set attribute, and I set it to completely black. And then I go to select, invert to select all the other hair parts. And I go to curves again, set attribute, and I set it to completely white. And go out of edit mode. The most important thing for you to know is if you activate the partial selection, then you can control all hair parts that are marked white with these settings and all hair parts that are marked black with these settings. And general settings like the wind or the proxy hair are for both. So we set the attribute name here, which was only color. And then I go down with the affected length and crank the stiffness up. And now we can test it. And as you can see, the short hair is only moving very little now. And we can also activate the proxy hair again. So I set it to 0.1, go to the first frame, and then, yeah, it looks quite nice, I would say. And last but not least, we can also select an additional collision object here, like the sphere, for example. Also make sure that it has enough faces. And then I crank the collision reactivity a bit up and test it out. And as you can see, it works. But it's also only for smaller corrections, like the first collision. But yeah, sometimes it can be very helpful. And yeah, if you go too much into the hair, then it will cause something like this. So be careful also with the collision reactivity. Then we come to the objects area, and this allows you to attach objects to specific points of the simulated hair. So like here, for example, we have two hair ties and they also have to move a bit with the hair because otherwise it looks like this. And yeah, this looks a bit weird if they are completely still. To do this, we first select the hair, then we add the modifier. And then under the hair simulation modifier is the new hair objects modifier. And here we can select the object first, which is the head wheel. And then we can also hide the original object because it's now instanced on the hair so that it can dynamically react to the hair movements. The index describes on which point the object is instanced. So if I change the number, then I also change the position of the object. But of course, it's a bit hard to find the right position like this. So we can first click on Create Helper Object, and then we can select a specific point to which we want to bind the object to. So in my case, I choose this point maybe. And then I click on Find Index. And then it outputs the right index and also copied it directly in the clipboard. So we can go out of edit mode now. Then we can deactivate the helper hair and go to our original hair. And here we can paste the right index number with Ctrl V. and here it is. And then we can also adjust the position a bit if we need it, but in my case, it was already quite good, so I leave it at 0 for now. And for the rotation, we have two ways. The first one is to activate the point rotation. With that, the object rotates exactly like the selected point. If activated, it also changes the rotation first because it's now synchronized with the point rotation. And because of this, you first have to counteract with the rotation here and adjust it new to, something like this. And then if I now move the head, then as you can see, even, the rotation moves now with it. But sometimes the point rotation can be a bit too much or also a bit buggy. And in this case, you would have to deactivate it and set the rotation new. And then you can select a specific rotation reference here. So in my case, I can choose the hair proxy object, for example, and then it rotates exactly like this object. And you can also set up a second object here if you need it. If you want to bake the simulation to render it out, then first make sure that you have here under Manage, Bake, the bake target set to disk. Because if you pack everything into the file, then the file gets very big and it also doesn't really work with this option at the moment. So set it to disk, and then you can also set a bake path if you want. If you don't do this, then it will automatically set a bake path. And here we can now go to the physics properties and click on bake. And here we go. And finally, we come to the Find Simulated Hairs button. You need it if you append a hair from another file which is already simulated. So like here, I append one from this file. Then as you can see, we already have a hair simulation modifier here. The thing is, if you append the hair simulation modifier and it already exists in the file, then Blender automatically renames it to something like 0.001, and that's why it isn't shown here. But you can just click on this button and then the add-on finds all modifiers related to HairFlow and links them together. And don't worry, the settings are still working independently from each other. And it's also shown here then. So that was it. I really hope that you will have much fun with this add-on and just try it out.